This is the fifth in a series of vids I've made about consciousness, and it's part of an ongoing story. I've got a lot of different things I want to talk about, like LSD, but only a bit of it, things that are relevant to the infinite plane. So some of the properties of LSD are that information from the unconscious kind of bubbles up into consciousness or the subconscious. And some of this can be rather interesting and profound, other can be extremely trivial. To give you a trivial case, I was walking while tripping with a friend at night through an apartment building into a parking lot, and suddenly a large green cat with a very ominous look to it jumped out from below and across up from my left right in front of me. And I looked to my left from where it came down, and there was a car which I was not aware of noticing, who was dark green. I didn't recognize the make, but it was a sports car and it had a look. The headlights and the grill had the same look as the face of the cat. And I kind of kneeled down to look at the make of the car. My friend said, "What are you doing?" I didn't answer, and I saw that it was a cougar, and I said nothing, and we kept going. But the thing is, it just came up. It was there in my brain. It didn't hit consciousness, and then it popped up in the form of a large cat, which is extremely trivial, but it is an example of what can occur. But there is more stuff that can occur that is far more complex. For instance, there is a whole language that can be expressed of the unconscious, something I learned when I started looking at dreams. Some of the stuff made no sense ever, couldn't work it out, but a lot of it was very interesting, and it showed me how we translate things like a cougar car to a cat. A very trivial example, but there's a lot of other examples that occur in dreams, and you start to see, oh, this is the way the mind works. This is where literature comes from. The metaphors and the analogies that we create are coming from our unconscious. And it wasn't until much later where that translated into my interest in Carl Jung and myths and all that kind of stuff. The thing that acid does is it creates this enormous sense of profundity that whatever you're thinking about is just utterly profound. Now, not always, but it can, and it's something remarkable. It's very emotional. Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World, had the impression under mescaline that he had discovered a great, great truth. And he wrote it down for later so he could review it. And when he reviewed it, this great truth, he had written down, "Higamus, hogamus, woman is monogamous, hogamus, higamus, man is polygamous." So there's this kind of trickster nature where you really believe something is profound, great wisdom, and actually, in that case, it's just silly. Now, it's not that you can't come across some things that are somewhat profound, but they tend to be things that you come across anyway, but acid can make them more readily available, but it also creates a lot of bullshit, too. And if you take a high enough dose, it's just a big old mishmash. It's a crazy circus, and you can pick through the pieces and see what you get. Okay, well, the other thing I should mention is that it can also lead to distortions in the exaggerations. Like, for instance, that summer before the infinite plane, when Steve, myself, and a friend of Steve's, Rick, we'd been trying to get some LSD, and we just managed to get in the last day that we were visiting Steve. And what happened was we went to a concert at Red Rocks, which is a really cool amphitheater built into the red rocks of the Rocky Mountains right outside of Denver. And we took a good dose of LSD, and we stayed up all night. And we had to go to the airport the next day, at least Rick and I. And we were still tripping, and Karen, that's Steve's wife, so let me introduce her now. She's kind of the adult in the relationship between Steve and Karen in the marriage. She was off at work, and so it was Steve's job to get us to the airport. Now, Steve isn't the best with directions, and so Like, to give you an example, we were once going to go to a mall in Boulder, Colorado, and I guess most time Steve went with Karen, so she knew where it was. So I remember Steve had asked Karen what he was going to take us. Where is the Arapahoe Mall? That was what it's called, the Arapahoe Mall. And I remember she said, on Arapahoe. It was just funny. It was typical of the relationship, which I want to talk about more because that connects to my relationship with Alex and the differences there. And some of the things I didn't realize, but then began to realize during a very, very intense trip on the infinite plane. So we're going to the airport, and it appears to be an impossible task because Steve doesn't know where the airport is, and the three of us are tripping, and Steve kind of throws up his hands and says, we'll never get there. And of course, under LSD, another thing that can occur is you're very suggestible, and so we all had just decided it's impossible, which is actually quite funny because at that moment there was a sign that said airport. And we didn't think it was divine intervention, but we all just started laughing. And I remember Steve saying, I know how, and we were just laughing. I know it sounds silly. This is the non-profound aspect of my talk, and maybe I'll get into some profound stuff, next video, because 10 minutes is such a short time. Unless you're utterly bored by this, and then it's a very long time. Anyway, we all realized that all we had to do was do what we would normally do and follow the signs, but that suggestion at that instant had created that notion. When we got to the airport, we got there in plenty of time for our flights, and I ordered some hot pastries filled with raspberry for all of us, and I sat down and took a bite, and it was like incredible. I mean, it was the best food I had ever tasted. Well, this is that idea of this exaggeration, distortion. I mean, you honestly believe this is the best ever. Now, I tripped long enough to realize intellectually that this is not true. It's an exaggeration. It's distortion, but it feels that way. It just feels unbelievable. And I warned the guys that, this is incredibly good. Now, of course, we hadn't eaten since last night, and we were all hungry and tired, and they, of course, me suggesting that it was so good, and it was really, really good, and it was cold out, and I guess it wasn't cold out because this was summer, so, but it was great. Okay, well, I think the last bit to set up the infinite plane is just to describe the relationship between Steve and Karen. They were really a great match, and all of the friends that saw them together realized that. Essentially, Karen was an omnivore of information, extremely intelligent, and she would get all the Jeopardy questions right except for 3. Having the advantage of not having to buzz in, she could just answer them all, and she really could. She had an incredible library. She knew everything. Steve, on the other hand, was a very bright guy, but his interests were more limited in consciousness and drugs. And psychology, meditation, that kind of stuff. And he really didn't like handling the world, and Karen did, and she did it brilliantly. And I think that in most cases it would be very hard for either Steve or Karen to find a partner because they were so extreme. Karen really liked to take control of things. She understood that she could be a little pushy, but she really had Steve's best interest at heart. And the whole idea was to support him and help him get through med school, have a child, and then she would go on and get her PhD, which she eventually did. And she kind of had it all planned. And Steve didn't like planning and all that, didn't like taxes and college loans and mortgages and all that kind of stuff. And so that's how they worked. And they were really good together. It worked out really well. And that kind of puts things in context because all that connects with some of my realizations on the infinite plane. And that's coming next. I'm sure of that.